Loads to get into. We're going to start right at the basics. And I want to start with what is a BIP. I covered this before, a couple of years ago now. But I think that's a good starting point. So do you want to explain what a BIP is?
A BIP stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. And it's a kind of specification for a proposed change to Bitcoin, which may be a consensus change or maybe a kind of opt-in thing that, some wallets can use and others choose not to. And so I guess BIP 1 is interesting as well. It was proposed by Amir Taki, who is, there's confusion between a Bitcoin developer of a particular wallet or Bitcoin developer or people looking at Bitcoin protocols in general. So I think BIPs are interesting to anybody technical working on Bitcoin, or whichever wallet they're working on. And some people are not even programmers, but they're interested in protocols and security.
Were there changes to Bitcoin prior to BIPs?
Probably. I'm supposing in the early days that Satoshi just fixed patches and rolled them out and told people on IRC, and they all upgraded. So I think there was less kind of caution, probably a lower security bar in the early days, and things became more cautious, more careful, more systematic as time went forward.
And then when did the BIPs come then?
I'm not sure of the date of BIP 1, but I think it's got to be pretty early, 2011, 2010, something like that, I would assume.
I'm trying to imagine how the process became established that there would be a BIP.
Right. Well, I think actually the Bitcoin upgrade process draws a lot from other internet protocols, and that evolved, in the, I guess, mid-80s, 90s. Something called the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, which manages a list of RFCs, which are BIP-like things describing, email protocols, web protocols, low-level internet transport protocols, all kinds of things that ensure interoperability at the internet level. And actually, not coincidentally, there was a big political debate about internet protocols, I think in the mid-80s, where there was starting to be big internet companies like Cisco and Microsoft who saw the internet protocols and thought they would like a vote, and that they thought their company's interests should be represented in how the protocols evolved. So it's kind of, see some parallels with that with the block size wars, 2015, right? So ultimately, and the people working on the protocol said, well, this isn't good. Internet protocols should be for the good of humans everywhere, users first. Companies, you're just service providers. It's interesting. We want to hear your technical experts, but we don't want you to override internet protocols in the interest of your companies, because your companies could come and go, and the internet is for humanity, not for you.
Well, it reminds me of that whole net neutrality thing.
Yeah. So ultimately, the users won that one. And there's a famous quote from David Clark, which is something like, we don't believe in kings and presidents. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And so that was, a famous quote making the point that they were going to use a rough consensus process, which is a kind of decision-making process from business or organizations, religious organizations, political organizations that's hundreds of years old and predates internet and everything. And so Bitcoin adopts that, but makes it a bit more decentralized.
Right. Okay. So BIP 1, Amir Taki.
Yeah, so it describes some of the process, creating a BIP, making a draft, that kind of thing. And usually you would want some example code so that it kind of proves that it works. So if there are one or two implementations, that's better than words, because words can sometimes be less precise than you thought they were.
Okay. But how many BIPs have we had now?
I don't know, probably 100 or something.
100. Okay, so someone's got an idea to improve Bitcoin. They develop a BIP, or they propose a BIP. How do they distribute this? Because this is the thing that's totally unclear to me.
So there's not that much of a bar to getting a BIP. Like, the fact that something has a BIP doesn't mean that anybody's going to implement it, or the Bitcoin protocol will be upgraded using it. But if you propose something that passes some basic it makes rough sense. Some people are discussing it. You can ask whoever is currently tasked with assigning numbers, can you have a BIP number? And then you then add it to a list on a website.
Right, okay. So there is a central repository of the BIPs.
Yeah, I think it's in GitHub.
Right, okay. So somebody makes a proposal for an idea for an upgrade, and they request a BIP number, maybe have some sample code to explain it, and that goes then to who?
It's just available to anybody who is interested in Bitcoin's technical evolution. And depending on the type of BIP, some of them are kind of core network rules. And then people are interested in security and robustness. And, if it's an opcode they're interested in.
What's an opcode? I hear about these all the time. I've never actually, in any interview, said, somebody explain an opcode to me.
So at the lowest level, Bitcoin has a kind of programming language. And a little bit like CPUs have operations at the basic level, which are very simple things that just add two numbers together and things like that. So Bitcoin has something like that at the lowest level. And over time, there have been new opcodes added to add new functionality, basically.
Right, okay. And so the BIP goes out there. A few people might take a look. A lot of people might take a look. You'll tend to get some feedback delivered in certain ways. And I guess if a BIP is, doesn't have much interest, then doesn't have much support, then that person either has to rework it or forget about it. Whereas if something shows a lot of interest, I guess this is the rough consensus thing, right? It's a bit messy.
Yeah, I mean, the IETF has some, texts and history about what rough consensus means in this process, and their model is a little bit more centralized. But generally, in some cases, there may be multiple ways to do something. And so one question is, which is the best way to do it? And then the idea is that, consensus generally means unanimity. Everybody agrees. But you've got to place some sanity bars around that, because some people object in a illogical way just to be disruptive. Not technical regular contributors, but if you just made a hard rule that, hey, if there's any objections, everything stops. Now, in a political version of consensus, that's basically what happens. That unless everybody agrees, things stay the same, and that's kind of what you want for Bitcoin in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want people to make drama and be able to change it, because that's where we started from. The 2008 financial crash, the politicians being asked to make extraordinary changes to the money supply, and basically making the money unreliable.
Like Luna.
Yeah, recent news. So anyway, that's the kind of process.
Right. Okay. So I get it. And then if there's some interest in something, it gets developed, gets to the point where there's general rough consensus that it's wanted. The code gets developed, it gets tested, and then you go through a process of activation. So that's like the general process.
Right. There's some historic examples, because some people commenting are, looking at it ab initio without any of the history of how it has worked, and that it does work, and it works very well for what it's intended to do, which is to make it very hard to, push changes to Bitcoin that not everybody wants. And, they might look at that as an obstacle because they want this. So then they'll say, well, we should change the process. First question is, well, before you change a process, do you realize there is a process, that it works, and why it's designed, why Bitcoin uses this process? So that's thing. Some historic examples are P2SH, which probably people have heard about. Mm-hmm. It's a mechanism that's used for multisig. At the time it was introduced, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, there were 3 versions. And there's an interesting cautionary history there, which is there was one called OpiVal, which some people were extremely keen on and pushed hard. And they were about to, launch it. And Russell O'Connor had a look at it, a developer who's still active in Bitcoin today. He had a look at it and found a horrendous flaw with it and said, wait a minute, you can't activate this. It will, create a denial of service amplification, and it's too dangerous. And so everybody recognized, wow, that's a terrible flaw. Let's abort that immediately at the last minute. And so then it switched over to P2SH, which was an alternative proposal. But there was actually another one called CHS, and I think there was a bit too much urgency, and so P2SH won over CHS, even though people were kind of on the fence or thinking maybe CHS was slightly better, but they didn't care enough. But in hindsight, given a few years and see how it used, evolved, and what the limits were, turns out CHS would have been the better of the three proposals. Okay. They narrowly of this. So there was kind of cautionary. So I think people learn from cautionary things. So now here we are, scroll forward to covenants. There are 4 or 5 different versions. Again, somebody's very enthusiastic about one and making a lot of noise, but there are other variants and they're probably better.
And I guess with certain upgrades, there's certain ways to do things, which can be a discussion point. There's certain changes that are easy binary decisions to make. So if it just makes Bitcoin more efficient, it's kind of either it makes it more efficient or it doesn't.
Taproot is a good example of that, right? So, I mean, the payload, well, both parts of Taproot make it more efficient, but more private, potentially. The Schnorr signatures are just more compact signatures. And of course, there were discussions about specific encoding and how to make the multi-signatures. And so there was lots of discussion there, but there was no debate that Schnorr signatures were the building block.
But with something like covenants, it brings new functionality where it doesn't seem to be that everyone agrees what it actually means or fully understands maybe what they mean. And if that brings any risk to fungibility and blacklist, whitelist, you'll be able to correct whether that's right or wrong. But that's a more contentious issue, because if you can change what you can do with Bitcoin rather than just make it more efficient, then there deserves to be more of a debate about what the outcome for this is.
Yeah. I mean, it's true to say that Bitcoin's programming language is sort of compact, concise, and sort of security first, and sort of intentionally safe and cautious, right? And so the covenant idea expands what you can do. I think philosophically, Bitcoin likes small scripts, not, big complicated programs. So I suppose there's a potential that people could write more elaborate things, which probably beyond a certain point are not good uses of block space. It could be done in different ways.